Hello guys, welcome to another video of Velvi. So in this video we are gonna see about tuples. So as we saw strings and lists, tuples also comes under the sequence object. So generally tuples are comma separated objects just like list, but unlike list, tuples are enclosed in parentheses and these parentheses are optional. We will see a few examples for this, and the most important thing about tuples is that these are immutable. Okay, so tuples are just like lists, but remember lists are mutable, which means that their values could change. Tuples are immutable. That means like you can't change a value of a tuple. Okay, so let's see a few examples of tuple for understanding. Before that, okay, so here I have a simple example of a tuple, just like list. How would you create a list? Like we saw. Uh, Let me do a better variable name. Let me do z. Okay, so here like 1, 2, and 3 are items in a list, right? So similarly, we create a tuple exactly the same way, but the only difference between a list and tuple in terms of syntax is here you use square brackets and here you use parentheses. Okay, so just remember this. So this is how you create a simple tuple. Okay, so let me delete this. I run this for you, and then you have a, and then to check the type of this object a, you just do type of a, and then you have Python showing it as tuple. Okay, so when we saw the definition, we saw like the parentheses are optional. So what it literally means is like the exact same tuple can be created this way as well. Okay, so here I have like b equal 1 comma 2 comma 3. So item comma separated item, that's it, not even parentheses is being used. So let me see what I get now. So I just create and then I just do type of b. So this is a tuple as well. So you see like tuples are comma separated items where the parentheses is just optional. But the thing here is like it's highly recommended that you use the parentheses. So this might be for various reasons. Let's say for example, you're creating a tuple of tuple or tuple inside a list, etc, etc. Okay, so in these cases you must have the parentheses for the purpose of readability, and then that makes your code much more trustworthy, right? Or that isn't the exact word that I should be using, maybe much easier, right? Let's say for example, if someone else is reading your code, it's good to make sure that they understand your code, right? Also, that is one of the standard way in which across the globe people represent tuple. Okay, so let's go ahead. So just like list, tuple can have many compound item data types as well. So here we just saw like a tuple containing 3 items. All of them correspond to an integer object. So here I just created a tuple 1, 2, 3, and then few strings, ancient, comma, target, comma, and finally a boolean object true. So Python totally accepts this, and then I just created this as well. Okay, quite simple. Okay, so far so good, right? So now, just like list, how do we create an empty tuple? It's quite simple. Okay, similar to list, how you create an empty one, you just do tuple parentheses, you just invoke an empty tuple using this particular syntax. Okay, so I just do this, so it's empty. Okay, so how do you find whether a given particular object is empty or not? Remember, the Boolean equivalent of empty objects is always going to be false, right? So you just could do bool of empty object, empty underscore tuple, it throws false. So that means like the given object is empty. Okay, so this is how you evaluate whether a given object is empty or not. So just to repeat this from the previous videos, 0 in integer, 0, 0.0 when it's float, false is of course false, and then like empty string. Okay, so let me quickly do this. 0, 0, 0.0 empty string, and then list, an empty list, and then an empty tuple. Okay, so all these corresponds to the boolean false. Okay, so now you could just see like I just created a series of comma separated item. So this itself is now a tuple. Okay, so let me just quickly assign this to a variable. Okay, so what variable? False. Okay, so you could see like this is just a tuple containing all the possible empty items of all data of many possible data types. Okay, so to quickly see its type, it's tuple. Okay, so similarly the other way to create an empty tuple is like you just do a empty parenthesis. Okay, so this just creates an empty tuple as well. Okay, so you could just quickly check, just type to verify it's tuple. Okay, so now you saw how to assign a tuple, how to create an empty tuple, but here is the catch with respect to tuple. When you want to create a tuple of only one element, you just can't do this. Okay, so if I do this, a is 1, I'm just checking the type of a, it shows int. Okay, not a tuple. So now you may argue that you just enclose the object in a parenthesis, so why isn't Python taking this as a tuple? Right, so just think this way. When we introduce tuple, we say like the parenthesis is optional, right? So let me do the same thing without the parentheses. Okay, so here I just do like b equals to 1. Okay, so which must be technically equal to b equal to, right? Okay, so what I had done here is like I just assign the value 1 to b. So it's obvious that b is now going to be of type integer, right? So clear. But we just saw like when we enclose this a single object in a parentheses, Python just takes the type of that object that you enclose. Not, it doesn't make it as a tuple. Okay, so this is a reason why you need to understand why the parenthesis is optional in tuple. Okay, so in order to avoid this confusion, okay, so you always need to have a comma when you have at least one object in a tuple. Okay, so if I want to have just this one in a tuple, what I should do is 1 comma. Okay, quite simple. Now the parenthesis is optional. You could either have this or need not have this. So let me do this now. So you could see this. A is now a tuple. Let me check its type. Tuple. Okay, so you could just do this as well. This is going to be a tuple as well. Okay, quite simple, right? So now you understood why you need to have a comma for sure if you're creating a tuple of even at least one object, right? So this particular tuples containing only one object is often referred to as singleton. Okay, so that means like tuple containing only one object. So far so good, right? So we just saw how to create tuples, how to create empty tuples, how to create a tuple of one item. But remember, this isn't the case with list. Okay, so to quickly go back to list, you could just create list like this. Okay, so this is a list. So just remember this. This is only for tuples. You need to have comma for tuples even if that's only one object. So now the obvious question is a comma an optional parameter in list, or I shouldn't be using parameter, but a optional syntax maybe. So does this work with Python? Yes, it absolutely works. Okay, but it isn't necessary with respect to list. But with respect to tuples, commas are must. Okay, so let me quickly delete this. So going forward, now what we want to see is indexing and slicing. So we saw indexing and slicing, the concept behind it, and we saw how indexing and slicing works in strings and in lists. Okay, so the indexing and slicing works exactly the same way in tuples as well. Okay, but the only difference is in lists, you could assign item values, right? Because it's a mutable object. But in tuples, you can't assign item objects through indexing or slicing because tuples are immutable, just like strings. Okay, so just remember this always. You can't do item assignment in tuples and in strings because these two are immutable. Okay, in list you could do because lists are mutable. Okay, good. So this is the tuple that we have. So let me quickly do some basic indexing and slicing that we saw in the last video. So tuple of 0 returns the first element, tup of -2 returns the second element from the last. So if this target here, tup of 1 is going to return the second element, which is this, and tup of 1, I'm just trying to change the value. So we just saw like tup of 1 is 2. Okay, so I'm just trying to assign a new value to this particular item, and this is obviously going to throw an error because tuple does not support item assignment. This is because tuples are immutable. I'm just kind of repeating this again and again because I just want you to make sure like you get this really straight. Okay, no confusion should be on this particular topic. Like if I wake you up at 2 a.m. in the morning and ask you what's the difference between mutable and immutable, you should be able to say that. Okay, so that's a good sign. Okay, so just the reason I just keep on repeating few stuffs. Okay, so don't mistake me for that. Okay, so similarly to indexing, slicing works the same way. I'm just trying to slice the first two elements and I get 1 and 2. And then just like how we saw how to reverse a particular sequence using slicing in strings and lists, you could do the same thing in tuples as well. So tup of colon colon -1, you're just trying to go from the using the backward index. So it's just gonna reverse the tuple that you have. So you have like 1, 2, 3 ancient target true. So now what you have is true target ancient 3, 2, 1. Quite simple, right? So don't get confused. Okay, so we just saw like you can't change an item in a tuple, but now you kind of like change the whole tuple itself by reversing the order. Just remember when I do this, I'm just creating a new tuple. Okay, I'm not changing the value of the existing tuple. So if I just do now tup is still 1, 2, 3 ancient target true, not true a target ancient dot dot dot. Okay, so what happens here is Python creates a new tuple. Okay, even when you're doing slicing or indexing. Okay, with respect to indexing, it doesn't like return a tuple, it returns only the item. Okay, unless the item itself is a tuple. Okay, but when you slice, you're always going to get a tuple, right? So Python isn't creating or altering the existing tuple. It's just kind of like creating a new tuple. Okay, so just remember this. If you wanna kind of like, let's say for example, reverse a tuple, you could just do this and assign this to another variable. So from there on, you could just use this tuple for your further processes. Okay, so quite simple, right? So indexing and slicing is same as list and strings, except that you can't do item assignment like you could do in list. Okay. So next I want to discuss the various methods that are available in tuples. So since tuples are immutable, okay, so you don't have like many methods to work on. Let's say for example, when we saw list, we saw append, extend, sort, reverse, right? But these aren't gonna work in tuples because let's say for example, when you do append or extend, you're kind of like altering the existing sequence, right? So in case of tuples, you can't change these values. So that's the reason why there aren't many methods available in tuple, only count and index. So those two are straightforward methods that you have seen. Okay, we have this tuple. I'm just trying to count tup of dot count of 2, trying to count how many 2's are in this tuple. So there is just only 1, 2. So you have the value 1. So next, index. So index is the same as the index that you saw on list. Okay, so you just input the value and then Python returns the index of that particular value. So here I do tup of index of target. So Python returns 4. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, fine. So and then you could input the start and end value of the index as well. Let's say for example, index, and then you input the value and then start and stop index. So what I'm saying to Python here is get me the index of the value target and then like start at index 0 and end at index 3. Okay, so now here target is at index 4, right? So that isn't in the range that I entered here, so Python is going to throw error. It says like tuple index x in x not in tuple. Okay, so that means like the target isn't there in the tuple, the range that I'm searching for. So quite simple, right? So other thing that I left out is similar how we saw the plus operator could concatenate to lists to strings. So similarly, plus operator does the same thing in tuples as well. So quickly let me do that. Okay, so here I have two tuples. So you could see that this is a separate tuple, this is a separate tuple, and using the plus operator, both these tuples have been concatenated together. Okay, so remember that this is going to create a new tuple. It doesn't change the values of the existing one. Okay, so similarly, other thing that we saw was the multiplication operator. So just like how it worked on list and strings the same way. Okay, let me just do it. So 1, 2, 3 is a tuple here, and then I'm just multiplying it with 2. So you just get 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, the same old stuff, okay? And then similarly, we saw length. So I can just do this. So length of TUP is 6. We have 6 items in here. So quite simple, right? So let us go into kind of like a complex term. So last week we saw like list of list having list inside a list. So similarly, you could do like tuple inside a tuple as well. So this is just an example. So it's kind of like a 2D array or matrix. So you have this right now. So now the first item tup of 0, I'm just trying to use indexing in this particular tuple of tuples. So here it's going to return me the first tuple here because this is the first item in this tuple. So you could follow the parentheses pattern in here. So this is where the parentheses comes in handy, right? So in order to have the understanding, have the clarity. Okay, so this is the parent tuple, and this is a tuple inside, and this is another one, and this is another one. So TEP of 0 is going to return me this particular tuple in here. So this is what I have here. So let's say, for example, I want to get this particular value 2. So using indexing is quite simple. So I just do like TUP of 0, which is going to give you this particular tuple, and then you go with TP of 0 of 1, which is going to like traverse 0, 1, and then it returns 2. So similarly, let's say for example, you want to get the value 8. So you could, here I have just done using negative indexing. You could do using both positive and negative, or kind of like a mixed variation as well. So TUP of -1 is going to give me this particular tuple. And then again, of the tuple, -2 is the second element from the last. Okay, so this is -1, this is -2, so I just got 8. Okay, so the other way, just to show you quickly, you could do TP of 2 of -2. This is again going to give me 8. Okay, again the answer is simple. So TP of 2 is going to give me this particular tuple, and again of -2 is going to give me 8. So simple, right? So finally, what I have here is kind of like slicing mixed with indexing. So what I do is like I just try to extract the first two items of this particular tuple TUP. Okay, so it's going to return me these two tuples because these two are the first two tuples of the parent tuple. And then in that particular slice, I'm just trying to access the first element, which is 1, 2, 3. So quite simple, right? So I hope it's clear as of now. So let's get this more interesting. Let's say, for example, I have a list inside a tuple. Okay, as we saw list and tuple, you could have any item inside them. You could have a list inside a tuple, you could have a tuple inside a tuple, you could have a function inside a tuple, you could have a class inside a tuple. So we will see all those crazy stuff later during the course. But from with what we have seen here, I have a list enclosed within a tuple. Okay, so 1, comma 2, comma 3, comma a list which contains the value history, comma math, comma science. So if I just try to access the first value through indexing, I'm going to get 1. Okay, quite simple. So if I just use negative indexing, a of -1, I'm going to get the last element, which is a list in here. Okay, so this is what I get right here. And as we saw before, if I do like a of 0 equal to 23, it's not going to work because I am trying to change an item value of a tuple, right? So you can't change values of a tuple, right? So this won't work. Python just throws a type error saying tuple object does not support item assignment. Okay. So similarly, I just try to change the last element with another list, or you could just do with any other value as well, whichever you want to change. So again, this won't work because a of -1 is an item of the tuple. Okay. So you can't change values of a tuple, right? So Python throws again the same error. But now here's the key. So, oops. Okay. So A we have 1 comma 2 comma 3 this. So now let me try to do this. Let's see what Python does. So A of -1, okay, which is going to give me this list. And in this list, I'm taking the first value and changing it to Spanish. So that means I'm trying to replace the value history with Spanish. And Python does it for me. Okay, so please make a sharp note here. So what I exactly did here is I changed the value of a list, not the value of a tuple. Okay, so that's the reason Python didn't throw an error. Of course, you could argue that this particular list is inside a tuple. Okay, but this particular values, history, math, and science aren't part of a tuple. These values are part of a list. So that means is that you could change these values. These are mutable, right? So that's why Python accepted this particular command a of -1 of 0 equal to Spanish without any error. Okay, and finally it did change the value as well. So now we have the tuple a being updated to 1 comma 2 comma 3 comma a list which has the values Spanish, math, and science. Okay, so remember that we didn't change a value of a tuple, we changed the value of a list which is inside a tuple. Okay, so just remember this. Hope it isn't confusing, but just get the nuances right. Okay, so you cannot change a value of a tuple. You always can change the value of a list, even if that list is inside a tuple. Okay, so just remember this. Okay, I hope it's clear now. Okay, so similarly, let's see the opposite case as well. What happens when you have tuples inside a list? So I exactly have the same values that we saw here, but this time everything is inside a list and these particular items are now inside a tuple. So b of 0 equal to 34 is gonna work now. This is because b of 0, this particular item, is a value of a list, not tuple. Okay, so you could see this 1 has been replaced with 34 now. So now I try to replace b of -1 to physics, comma, chemistry, comma, biology, which is again a tuple, and Python again accepts this. So this is because this whole thing in here is an item of a list. Okay, so items of a list are subject to change because they are mutable. So Python accepts this as well and doesn't throw an error. So you have this right now. Let's say for example, now we want to change this particular value, physics, to science. Okay, so now Python won't allow this to happen because b of -1 is a tuple. Okay, and then b of -1 of 0 is physics, which is a value inside a tuple, and tuple doesn't support item assignment. So that's the reason why you have Python throwing the error tuple objects does not support item assignment. Okay, I hope it's clear. Okay, so even though you have a tuple inside a list, the values of the tuple cannot be changed because tuples are always immutable even if they are placed inside a list. Okay, so just make sure you get these points very clear. Okay, so if you have any further questions, make sure you comment regarding this. I could explain it better or clarify it through comments or even better examples. Okay, so this is another important thing that you should know about how Python's list and tuples could work. Okay, so that's all about tuples. Okay, so we just saw like how to create these and what's the difference between tuple and list, indexing, slicing. Everything is almost kind of like similar, right? So, and then finally we saw what happens when you have a tuple inside a list and a list inside a tuple and how you could change the values, etc., etc. So now the obvious question would be like when to use a tuple and when to use a list. Okay, so what I would highly recommend is, let's say for example, uh, it depends upon the situation, of course. You store values in a tuple when you are sure that the values are not going to change. Let's say for example, mm, a good example would be the states of the various states of America. Okay, so let's say for example, Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, Florida. So these values aren't going to change at all, right? Also, like you're not going to have new values being added to this particular series of items unless something dramatic happens, right? So given all these cases, the number of values of the states of America is constant, and also the change of these values is kind of like very unlikely to happen. You store them in a tuple because tuple values cannot be changed, and you want to make sure you store the best data structure that Python provides, right? So now the obvious question is like, when do you use list? Let's say, for example, I'm keeping track of the various destinations that I have toured. Okay, so last week I was in Montana. Okay, so and this week I'm in Florida. Okay, so next week I might go to Wisconsin. So it's kind of like you're always adding values to this particular series of items, right? So here, list is a good thing to use because you're always adding values to it. Okay, so uh, maybe the next video I'm planning to talk about dictionaries, and after that I will show you the differences between lists, tuples and dictionaries, which is faster in terms of like computing or fetching data. That will give you an idea like why you should be using tuples. So the case in which I said the storing the various states of the United States, you could use lists as well, it's totally fine. But we will see like in terms of computation which is much more efficient, a tuple or a list, in the coming videos. Okay, so apart from that, did I leave something important regarding tuples? I think I covered everything regarding tuple that I want to cover. Okay, so just keep on practicing. Just make sure you have a fair understanding of up till what you have done. So these are the foundation of Python, for which we are going to see like maybe 2 to 3 videos from now on. Okay, so if you have any question, leave some comment. If you have any kind of like a detailed questions to ask, you could always leave an email. So if you like this video, give a thumbs up. If not, give a thumbs down. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you. See you in the next video. Goodbye.